agradeciendo al comité organizador, como siempre, muy activo en este tipo de temas. Creo que son parte de la vida diaria de nosotros que estamos acá. Los Incoterms son, creo, en muchos de los casos, el éxito o el fracaso en las negociaciones de las empresas. Cuento con una anécdota que muchos que no están muy bien adecuados a estas normas prefieren meter en fábrica, ¿verdad? Dicen el famoso ex-work. Pero ¿qué sucede? Es válido el término, pero no se dan cuenta del riesgo de ellos, al cual ellos se someten. Conozco el caso, no voy a decir obviamente el nombre de la empresa, que el comprador insistía en comprar ex-work. Estamos hablando de muchas toneladas, de muchos camiones. Sabemos que esta empresa obviamente tiene que sustentar la exportación, que hoy en día se ha convertido en un problema más que nada tributario. Pero resulta que al cruce de frontera la mercadería fue infiltrada. Somos un país exportador de droga, lamentablemente, y vamos, la mercadería estaba al nombre de ellos, la mercadería, los sacos decían el nombre de la empresa, en el periódico salió los sacos con el nombre de la empresa, es decir, todo un lío. Obviamente ellos no tuvieron nada que ver porque fue el comprador que fue a la fábrica a recoger la mercadería, fue él, el delincuente, y no fue el dueño de la carga. Entonces, no estoy diciendo que el término de work no es un término válido para usarlo, pero yo creo que es importante, y instituciones como nosotros enseñamos justamente a promover el uso adecuado de los Incoterms, y esperemos que con la valiosa presencia del doctor vamos a poder saber de qué se trata todo esto y todos los cambios que hay. Cada 10 años hay modificaciones en el contexto, y no porque se le ocurra a un loco por ahí quererlo cambiar, sino porque sabemos que la vida cambia, los barcos cambian, los camiones cambian, las personas cambian, las modalidades cambian, los países cambian de normatividad, y hay que adecuarnos. Ya no somos Perú, somos el mundo entero y tenemos que adecuarnos. Leí un resumen que me pasó Orlando, que hay varios Incoterms que simplemente se han eliminado. ¿Por qué? Porque no tienen sentido. No tiene sentido de pertenecer, nosotros de seguir existiendo. Nosotros hacemos exportaciones por frontera y seguimos utilizando el término FOB. Vamos, pongámonos un poco en orden, veamos de qué manera podemos utilizar aspectos de claridad en nuestras negociaciones, los términos correctos. Eso nos puede ahorrar muchísimo dinero. Yo le quiero agradecer a todos. Hay un problema, por si acaso, que se está suscitando. Yo no estaba muy enterado en la última cena que hubo con el presidente del comité. Hay un problema tributario con aquellos que están utilizando el término export. Quería profundizar eso quizás en otro momento, pero así como sucede con los traders que no pueden comprar y exonerarse del IGB, en el caso de los airports, aparentemente la SUNAT ya está aplicando el IGB, cuando los señores van a tener finalmente su duda. Entonces habría que aplicar algunos procedimientos y algunas normas para que esos exportadores que válidamente utilizan el término de export no se afecten con esta norma por culpa de otros. Nuevamente les agradezco a todos por su presencia. Disfruten esto. Entiendo que ha sido gratuita la invitación. Les felicito nuevamente a todo el comité. Y nada, los dejo como el experto, porque yo más técnico de esto no puede ser que el señor. ¿Sí? Bienvenidos nuevamente y espero verlos por aquí en otra oportunidad. Gracias.
Previo la presentación de la conferencia a cargo de Eduardo García-Godos, que es coordinador de Facilitación de Comercio del proyecto USAID, Facilitación de Comercio.
Buenos días. Primero que nada quería agradecer a Adex por su valiosa y desinteresada participación en este evento. Como ustedes saben, nuestro proyecto USAID Facilitando el Comercio, que ya viene trabajando hace un año, tiene como propósito asistir al gobierno peruano y a la comunidad empresarial vinculada al comercio exterior en la simplificación de procedimientos administrativos en varios frentes. Estamos trabajando en también en el comercio exterior, ayudando a la mejora de los procedimientos aduaneros y sin duda que prestamos mucha atención a las tendencias internacionales en cualquier tema que tenga que ver con el comercio internacional. Y precisamente hemos tenido la suerte de tener en el país al doctor y profesor Fillipo Lorenzon, que gentilmente aceptó venir acá para dictarnos una charla. Fillipo es profesor de la Universidad de Southampton y director del Instituto de Derecho Marítimo de dicha universidad. Muchos de ustedes saben que es una de las mejores universidades del mundo de Derecho Marítimo y Transporte Internacional. Él es abogado, está acreditado en la práctica en Italia y en Inglaterra. Ha trabajado también en los borradores que se presentaron a la Cámara de Comercio Internacional respecto de los Incoterms, y ha escrito un libro acerca de las reglas de Rotterdam, que es uno de los temas que precisamente vamos a tocar en esta exposición. Entonces, sin más preámbulo, creo, lo dejo a Fillipo para que comience con su exposición, que me imagino que será por el término de una hora, y luego de lo cual seguramente muchos de ustedes tendrán preguntas, así que le dedicaremos una parte importante de este tiempo para resolver sus inquietudes. Cabe indicarle que Fillipo ha entregado a varios de ustedes alguna papelería del Instituto de Derecho Marítimo. Sin embargo, parece que no tenemos suficientes materiales, pero quienes quieran tener alguna información adicional pueden recurrir a él o pueden dejarle también su tarjeta, de modo que los puedan contactar más adelante. Bueno, muchas gracias y adelante.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, I have to speak in English. There's landing some pressure on me to try and speak in Italian. I thought it was not appropriate. Can we have the light on, please? Can't see. It's very early in the morning. We can fall asleep. Particularly some of us. Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for the very kind introductions, certainly undeserved. I also would like to thank Eduardo for pulling together such a fantastic event, and Miriam Sara Repeto, of course, who has endeavored to have me here in Peru, and in particular with this particular event. This is my first time in Peru. I came here for the international, the South American Port Authority Conference, which taught me a great deal about what's going on. And I think this area of the world, and particularly Callao, is going to have a very, very bright future for all of you if the right things are done. But we can talk about it in the discussion. I have a very difficult task this morning. First, because it is early. Secondly, because I'm asked to talk to you about Incoterms and the Rotterdam rules in 1 hour, which of course I'm not going to be able to do. If you want to learn everything about Incoterms and the Rotterdam rules, you can certainly come to Southampton or organize a training course in here. What I plan to do this morning is just to go through one issue which I think is particularly relevant to all exporters and to all importers: money. International trade is all about money. It's all about goods being sold from one country being bought in another country in exchange for money consideration, which in sales law is called the price. And there is one issue which is particularly important with our sort of businesses, the shipment sales, which is documents. Under CIF, CFR, CNF, FOB contracts, exporters, sellers are paid for documents, not for goods. The duty which triggers the obligation of the buyer to pay the price is tender of the right documents. I was working with the ICC on this version of Incoterms. I've been watching very closely the Rotterdam rules from their inception, and I noticed from a very early stage that the documents were behaving funnily in the convention and indeed in the rules. I noticed that they weren't catered to work together, and I shouted, and I shout quite a lot, I can tell you that, but they wouldn't listen. People drafting Incoterms were thinking traders in a very trade way. People drafting the Rotterdam rules were thinking carriers in a very carriage way. But they didn't think carriage in trade terms and trade in carriage terms. And this is what I'm trying to convey today. Please stop me if you have any questions. I know we have a tight deadline and we have room for discussion later. But I'm told this is a very friendly group, among yourself, not necessarily with me. But so let's keep it as informal as possible. How do we do it? I say turn and you turn? So this is what I want to talk about today. I'll say something about... Right. It would be nice. I'll say something about the Incoterms, just very basic, I'm afraid, just what is necessary for us to go through them. The essentials on the Rotterdam rules will follow, and I'm afraid that we have to be even more basic because it's a much bulkier document, as you can see. The question then is, why do they matter? Why are we spending our morning looking at this? We'll then go to a question, an issue, and every time you ask a question you have to set the environment for the question. So the next, I will set the environment, the case for my question. I'll then talk about documentary duties, the question itself, and the technical, legal, documentary requirements to get paid. Bottom line, the discussion is, will a seller on CIF Incoterms 2010 rules be paid if the Rotterdam rules come into force? So this was pretty relevant to exporters and importers alike. Incoterms. This is it. Okay? Very thin, 55 euros. Huh? This little thing. You ask me, anyone from the ICC? You ask me, those are rubbish. But there are a few things which you really need to understand before we talk Incoterms. First, they are not an international convention at all. They have no legal status whatsoever, and they should not have any. This version calls themselves rules. They are no rules. This is a group of people sitting down in a very, very nice office in Paris, drafting these rules and selling these rules around the world. This is what the ICC is. Do not misunderstand these for an international convention, for the lex mercatoria. I think this version in particular is not the lex mercatoria at all. It goes against the understanding of merchants. So this is something which the parties, in the exercise of their freedom, choose to bring into their contracts. It is your choice, it's not the government choice. It's not Paris' choice. It's not the ICC choice. It's your choice. Handle it. Know what they are about. Because if you don't, you're choosing in the dark. They're not national law, are they? It's not international, but they're not even national. Now, I have to make a point here. Some courts and the Italians who are guilty of this, they sometimes mistake this for the general rule of the world's trade. And I tell you what I mean by that. There are decisions under Italian law whereby a judge said that if the parties use the words CIF, FOB, what they meant is Incoterms. This is most definitely wrong. It is wrong in law and it is wrong in principle. The ICC has no power to do that. Under English law, the situation is much clearer, and the judges have always said and will always say this is just a standard phone contract. And since there is no ICC presence here, very bad one. So, no national law, no international law, no international legal status. This is something which if you don't like, you can chuck it in the bin where it belongs. But today, I'm afraid I still need it. And it's 55 euros. So it's just another standard form, and they update it every 10 years. I was not part of the 2000 version, but as soon as I heard the whisper, 2010 version was coming, I immediately, together with all of my colleagues, started saying, why? 2000 is fantastic. It's a very good version. We've got 13 terms. People is getting used to the 2000 version. Why change it? This is not creating confusion. But the answer is, we need 55 euros. I'm sure the last is 60. The introduction, sorry. The introduction to the terms contains this sentence, which is, I think, very interesting. They say, reference to Incoterms, now it is a registered trademark. And I have to use it everywhere. It's a nightmare. 2010, in a same contract, clearly defines the parties' respective obligations and reduces the risk of legal complication. It is not true. It actually confuses a lot of things because I have a lot of clients. I'm afraid I am on the P&I side and I do international trade as well. I have a lot of clients, often from South American countries, which I will not specify, who say, Incoterms, of course we use Incoterms. My grandfather used Incoterms. We like using Incoterms. You know what they say? Of course. Then you ask a question, and of course they don't. But in particular, they use Incoterms together with a GAFTA contract, together with a phosphate contract, together with the London Sugar or Refined Sugar Association standard form. And those contracts do contain a clause which says that the Incoterms are expressly excluded. And then you have a problem. Because then you ask the exporter, have you read GAFTA 100? Of course I read GAFTA 100 when I was at elementary school, 77 years ago. They change. And the result, I'm afraid, is confusion. It's good for lawyers. Because then they come to us and say, oh, what have you done? Well, you haven't read the contract you signed. Right? But, so this is the publicity fly. If you refer to Incoterms, you're going to do great in business. Yeah, maybe. It's not because of the Incoterms. It's because you got a very good contract behind that. It deals, every Incoterm deals with passage of risk, carriage contracts, and insurance duties, tender of documents, among other things. Security, and I'll talk about this in a moment. But it does not deal with a couple of very, very important issues. Number one, passage of property. And I will stress this, guys, because companies today go bust quite a lot. In England, during the crisis, including now, it's getting better now, including now, we had about 22 companies shutting down every day because of credit difficulties. 22 companies a day increase the number of likelihood that one of those is one of your clients. And in that case, if there is a bankruptcy in the middle, then where property in the goods lie is a matter of money. Because if the property has gone to your buyer, then the property now lies with the trustee in bankruptcy. And therefore, you have a credit which is unsecured vis-a-vis a trustee in bankruptcy in another country, which means you lost your money. Okay? Every lawyer who tells you otherwise is borderline reportable to the authority. So property does matter. If the property is still with you, you can go back, get your goods, take them and sell them to somebody else. You spent a lot of money and you haven't lost it. Now, if it is a container full of llama skin, it's okay, it's a shame. But if it is a cargo of crude oil, then the shame is much bigger. So you wouldn't sell crude oil on CIF Incoterms. And the other detail which they don't deal with is payment, which is the very reason why you have a contract with the sale of goods, because you want the money. So these two crucial issues are not dealt with in Incoterms from their very first edition in 1936. But there are people out there, hopefully not in here, but out there who sell goods CIF Incoterms, and they make no reference of passage of property because they think the Incoterms deals with it. Only to find out from their lawyers that they lost a lot of money out of a little oversight. So that's why training is so important. You really have to know what they're bargaining into. A little bit more detail on the new version of Incoterms, the 2010 registered trademarks version. Now there are 11 Incoterms in there. In the 2000 edition there were 13. What if you were selling now on that version? I'm afraid it doesn't exist anymore. DAF, which is delivery at frontier, delivery ex ship, delivery ex key, and delivery duty unpaid, vanished, disappeared, not there anymore. So if you sell on those, I'm afraid you need to change your practice. There are, however, two new terms, the DAT, delivery at terminal, and the DAP, delivery at place, which try to replace these four. And let me use the word again, they try to replace these four, but they are different. If you don't know them, then I'm afraid you are again signing blank check. You don't know what you are committing your company to. The greatest improvement the ICC have done this time is to put them, to divide the terms in two groups. The little booklet, which costs, I stress, 55 euros, is divided into two chapters. Chapter 1, how they use it, any mode of transport part, which means you can use them irrespective of the mode of transport you've chosen. And the shipping terms, which shipping is dying, according to them, so they don't like shipping much, so they put them at the bottom. So that when you are trying to read them, you're tired and you don't understand what they say. Shipping, of course, is sea and inland waterways, which is good news, but they're now segregated at the end of the booklet. So the CIF and FOB, which is the ones most used in the world's trade, are at the bottom of the scale footage. Be very careful, guys, because there are a number of important changes, even to the most common rules. Passage of risk has changed. Now let me say this again. Passage of risk has changed. Why does passenger risk matter? Passenger risk is the most important thing in international trade. The risk we're talking about here is the risk of transit loss or deterioration in transit. We have learned at school, I'm sure we have, I have, that risk of transit loss on a CIF or FOB, say, contract passes from the seller to the buyer on or as from shipment. And the rule under English law and indeed international trade in general is that risk passes. If this is a ship across the imaginary line, which is the imaginary prosecution of the ship's rail. The rule is, let me say this, very stupid, but it has got a great advantage. It is very clear. So, if my container falls, if this is the vessel and my container falls outside, risk has not passed. And I, exporter, have not delivered. So I have to procure other goods for shipping. If the container still falls, but it falls in the ship, across the ship's rail, I have delivered. Mind you, my iPads, my computer will be destroyed anyway in the collision with the vessel. But I have shipped, I have crossed the ship's rail, and my duty vis-a-vis my buyer is accomplished. Problem there? No, the buyer has got insurance, so they can claim on the insurance policy. The carrier has got insurance, so they can claim on the insurance policy, and everybody is happy, including the insurers, because somehow they always manage to make money. Now the rule is changed. Surprise. This, 1,000 years of trade has gone out this way. Now the rule is different. Now you have to deliver on the ship, which means that the ship's trade is not relevant anymore. This is the ship, this is the cargo, or pen. Now, if the goods, if the container falls on the ship, it's not being put on the ship, that is the wording, and therefore it is just collapsed on the ship. So I'm afraid you have not performed your obligation, even if the crane who dropped your container is the ship's crane. Now, in Paris, at the shadow of the Tour Eiffel, that didn't probably seem very upsetting for anybody. But when I stand in a little office in Southampton, that did upset me a lot, and I'm sure that people around the world, once they realize this, because it's well hidden in A4, A5 of all the shipping terms at the bottom of the book, remember? I'm sure they will not be as pleased as the ICC. When I asked why, and I said, don't do it, they said, let's give it a try and see how it works. New security information duties, we're obsessed by security for reasons which are very well beyond my understanding. There was a big problem in 2001, and then everybody went berserk with security. Notwithstanding, there was no evidence whatsoever of any kind that shipping was under threat. But there has been one terrorist attack. There was a young guy dressed up with an explosive jumper who went on a jet ski on a tanker. Poor guy did not realize the tanker is made of steel, and the jet ski exploded. Poor guy didn't make it, but the vessel did, with just a scratch. They painted it back, and the vessel went off. There's nearly no evidence whatsoever that security is actually at stake in shipping for the terrorist matter. However, The IMO went completely berserk, they did the ISPS. The United States were even more berserk and did their own security regulations, and now we're all stuck with it, and therefore the Incoterms 2010 do provide for duties about security information. They do change as well the FOB duties in carriage contracts. Now you will remember again from high school probably, or elementary school, that in FOB contracts the seller has no duties of any kind whatsoever as far as shipment, as far as hiring the vessel, buying the tonnage is concerned. Well, now the FOB A3 term says otherwise. It says that in certain circumstances the FOB seller may need to do something about carriage, which I think is groundbreaking. And last, but by no means least, the shipping documents issues in CIF have changed dramatically, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The Rotterdam rules. Nobody from the UN here, is there? The Rotterdam rules is a new regime for the carriage of goods drafted by UNCITRAL. The story goes that a group of friends from the CMI, the World Maritime Law Association, sat down and thought, it's time for a new regime, and right as they were. And they started scribbling on a piece of paper a few ideas for a new regime. The Americans, no Americans in the room, the Americans then thought, oh, we'd like to do that. And they drafted in much less time a document which is called the US COXA, the US Carriage Goods by Sea Act 1999, which is a draft, still there, and under the US COXA, the entire world should have been complying with US law, which to some of you may come as a surprise, some others may not. US COXA 99 was terrible. It applied for voyages out of the US and in the US. Europe went berserk. They said, you are not going to regulate the export rules of Europe. We're Europe. What do you want from us? So they contacted yours truly, for reasons better known to them, and said, you, Fillipo, have to draft a multimodal transport regime which applies from Europe and to Europe compulsorily. And so I think they paid me for that, so why should I say no? So there were at a certain stage, and about 2005, two regimes. Draft. There was a draft act of Congress in the US, and there was a draft regulation which is directly applicable in all 27 states in the EU. Both of them telling each other, shouting at each other, I rule the world's trade. So for the good or for the worse, the United Nations said, well, hold on a minute, let me see whether I can do something about it. And so they did. So they went to the CMI, they took the drafting group of the CMI, and they gave them an umbrella, nice blue umbrella with a lot of little flags, and said, you're now working under the UNCTAD Secretariat. Good things and bad things. Good thing is that they have the money. Bad thing is that they are the United Nations. And as such, the procedures for drafting legislation is extremely cumbersome. They worked for another 7 years, and for altogether 7 years, so in 1905, so in 2009, eventually, they came up with a draft. Now, I don't know how much you know about the way the UN legislates, but my experience in dealing with lawyers, that if you sit two lawyers in a room, we got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different legal opinions, depending usually on who's paying who. The UN, we pay for each and every one of us. But they have the habit of putting hundreds of lawyers in the same room, exchanging views, recording dissenting opinions, trying to reach a compromise on everything. The IMO does not do that. The IMO goes full speed ahead. This is what we want, and this is the convention. You sign it, or you're out. Different approach, but the text is better. Now, the convention, as I said, remember you were party to the Hague rules, I'm told. There has been an amendment 2 years ago, which is called the Visby rules. There is another attempt, which is called the Hamburg rules. They tend to grow in numbers, okay? The articles tend to grow, but the Hague Visby rules, which is the one I'm more familiar with, it's got 10 articles. And I can promise that if you sit in a bus, even those mini buses around here, which I think they're a bit difficult to read on, but you can actually read the Hague Visby rules during one bus ride. There are other rules, 96 articles. I've written a book on them together with some of my colleagues at the Institute, and I have to say, in all honesty, I don't know what they say. Because they're so complicated, which, you know, I have worked in the shipping industry for many years. I used to be a Coast Guard when I was 18. I know cargo claims. I've done cargo claims forever. I don't know what they say. And what I understand, I don't